The continued reading of the Canterbury Tales, the Prologue, page 35. Was with us some deaf, which was a pity. In making cloth she showed so great a bent, she better those of Ypres and of Ghent. In all the parish not a dame dared stir towards the altar steps in front of her. And if indeed they did, so wrath was she as to be quite put out of charity. Her kerchiefs were of finely woven ground. I dared have sworn they weighed a good 10 pound. The ones she wore on Sunday on her head, her hose were of the finest scarlet red, and gartered tight. Her shoes were soft and new. Bold was her face, handsome and red in hue. A worthy woman all her life was more. She'd have 5 husbands, all at the church door, apart from other company in youth. No need just now to speak of that, forsooth. And she had thrice been to Jerusalem, seen many strange rivers, and passed over them. She'd been to Rome, and also to Boulogne, St. James of Compostela, and Cologne. And she was skilled in wandering by the way. She had gapped teeth, set widely, truth to say. Easily on an ambling horse she sat, well wimpled up, and on her head a hat, as broad as a buckler or a shield. She had flowing mantle that concealed large hips, her heels spurred sharply under that, in company she liked to laugh and chat, and knew the remedies for love's mischances, an art in which she knew the oldest dances. A holy-minded man of good renown there was, and poor the parson to a town. Yet he was rich in holy thought and work. He also was a learned man, a clerk, who truly knew Christ's gospel and would preach it devoutly to parishioners and teach it, benign and wonderfully diligent, and patient when adversity was sent. For so he proved in much adversity. He hated cursing to extort a fee. Nay, rather he preferred beyond a doubt giving to poor parishioners round about. Both from church offerings and his property, he could in little find sufficiency. Wide was his parish with houses far asunder, yet he neglected not in rain or thunder, in sickness or in grief, to pay a call on the remotest, whether great or small. Upon his feet and in his hand a stave, this noble example to his sheep he gave. That was that first he wrought and afterward he taught, and in it was from gospel he had caught. Those words he would add to this figure too, that if gold rust, then will iron do. For if a priest be foul in whom we trust, no wonder that a common man should rust. And shame it is to see, let priests take stock, a shitten shepherd and a snowy flock. The true example that a priest should give is one of cleanliness, how the sheep should live. He did not set his benefice to hire, and leave his sheep encumbered in the mire, or run to London to earn easy bread by singing masses for the wealthy dead, or find some brotherhood and get enrolled. He stayed at home and watched over his fold, so that no wolf should make that sheep miscarry. He was a shepherd and no mercenary. Holy and virtuous he was, but then never contemptuous of sinful men, never disdain, never too proud or fine, but was discreet in teaching and benign. His business was to show a fair behavior and draw men thus to heaven and their Saviour. Unless indeed a man were obstinate, and such whether of high or low estate, he should be put to sharp rebuke, to say the least. I think there never was a better priest. He sought no pomp or glory in his dealings, no scrupulosity had spiced his feelings. Christ and his 12 apostles and their lore he taught, but followed it himself before. There was a ploughman with him there, his brother, many a load of dun, one time or another, he must have carted through the morning dew. He was an honest worker, good and true, living in peace and perfect charity, and as the gospel bade him, so did he. loving God best with all his heart and mind, and then his neighbor as himself repined. At no misfortune slacked for no content, for steadily about his work he went, to thrash his corn, to dig, or to manure, or make a ditch, and he would help the poor, for love of Christ, and never take a penny, if he could help it, and, as prompt as any, he paid his tithes in full when they were due, on what he owned, and on his earnings too. He wore a tabard smock and rode a mare. There was a reeve, also a miller. There was a college manciple from Inns of Court, a papal pardoner, and, in close consort, a church court summoner, riding at a trot. And finally, myself. That was the lot. The miller was a chap 16 stone, a great stout fellow, big in brawn and bone. He did well out of them, for he could go and win the ram at any wrestling show. Broad, knotty, and short-shouldered he would boast, he could heave any door hinge off and post, or take a run and break it with his head. His beard, like any sow or fox, was red, and broad as well as though it were a spade, and at its very tip his nose displayed a wart on which there stood a tuft of hair, red as the bristles in an old sow's ear. His nostrils were as black as they were wide. He had a sword and a buckler at his side. His mighty mouth was like a furnace door. A wrangler and buffoon he had a store of tavern stories, filthy in the main. His was a master hand at stealing grain. He felt it with his thumb, and thus he knew its quality, and took 3 times his due. A thumb of gold, by God, to gauge an oat! He wore a hood of blue and a white coat. He liked to play his bagpipes up and down, and that was how he brought us out of town. The manciple came from the inner temple. All caterers might follow his example. In buying victuals he was never rash, whether he bought on credit or paid cash. He used to watch the market most precisely, and got in first, and so he did quite nicely. Now, isn't it a marvel of God's grace that an illiterate fellow can outpace the wisdom of a heap of learned men? His masters, he had more than 30, all versed in the abstrusest legal knowledge, could have produced a dozen from their college, fit to be stewards in land and rents and game to any peer in England you could name, and show him how to live on what he had, debt free, unless, of course, the peer were mad, or be as frugal as he might desire, and make them fit to help about the shire, in any legal case there was to try, and yet this manciple could wipe their eye. The reeve was old and choleric and thin, his beard was shaven closely to the skin. His shorn hair came abruptly to a stop above his ears, and he was docked on top. Just like a priest in front, his legs were lean, like sticks they were, no calf to be seen. He kept his bins and garners very trim. No auditor could gain a point on him, and he could judge by watching drought and rain the yield he might expect from seed and grain. His master's sheep, his animals and hens, pigs, horses, dairies, stores, and cattle pens were wholly trusted to his government. He had been under contract to present the accountants right from his master's earliest years. No one had ever caught him in the arrears. No bailiff, serf, or herdsman dared to kick. He knew their dodges, knew their every trick. Feared like the plague he was by those beneath. He had a lovely dwelling on a heath, shadowed and green by trees above the sward, a better hand at bargains than his lord. He had grown rich, and had a store of treasure, well tucked away, yet out of it came to pleasure. His lords with subtle loans or gifts of goods to earn his thanks, and even coats and hoods. When young he'd learnt a useful trade, and still he was a carpenter of first-rate skill. The stallion cob he rode at slow trot was dapple gray, and bore the name of Scott. He wore an overcoat of bluish shade, and rather long he had a rusty blade slung at his side. He came, I heard tell, from Norfolk, near a place called Bladeswell. His coat was tucked under his belt and splayed. He rode the hindmost of our cavalcade. There was a summoner with us at that inn, his face on fire like a cherubim, for he had carbuncles, his eyes were narrow, he was as hot and lecherous as a sparrow. Black scabby brows he had and a thin beard. Children were afraid when he appeared. No quicksilver, lead ointment, tartar creams, no brimstone or boracic could, so it seems, could make a salve that had the power to bite, clean up or cure his whelks of knobby white, or purge the pimples sitting on his cheeks. Garlic he loved, and onions too, and leeks, and drinking strong red wine till all was hazy. Then he would shout and jabber as if crazy, and he wouldn't speak a word except in Latin when he was drunk, such tags as he was patent. He would only had a few, say 2 or 3, that he had mugged out of some degree. No wonder, for he heard them every day. And as you know, a man can teach a jay to call out Walter better than the Pope. But that but had you tried to test his wits and grope for more, you'd have found nothing in the bag. And then questio quid juris was his tag. He was a noble varlet, and a kind one. You'd meet none better if you went to find one. Why, he'd allow, just for a quart of wine, any good lad to keep a concubine a 12-month and dispense him altogether, and he had finches of his own to feather. And if he found some rascal with a maid, he would instruct him not to be afraid. In such a case of Archdeacon's curse, unless the rascal's soul were in his purse. For in his purse the punishment should be. First is the good Archdeacon's hell, said he. But well I know he lied in what he said. A curse should put a guilty man in dread, for curses kill as shriving brings salvation. We should beware of excommunication. Thus, as he pleased, the man could bring duress on any young fellow in the diocese. He knew their secrets, they did what he said. He wore a garland set upon his head, large as the holly bush upon a stake, outside an alehouse, and he had a cake, a round one, which it was a joke to wield, as if it were intended for a shield. He and a gentle partner rode, a bird from a charing cross, of the same feather. Just back from visiting the court of Rome, he loudly sang, "Come hither, love, come home." The summoner sang deep seconds to this song. No trumpet ever sounded half as strong. This partner had as yellow as hair as yellow as wax, hanging down smoothly like a hank of flax. All right. So I lied in the last video. One more part to the Canterbury Tales, the prologue. Check out our 4th video to conclude this portion of the story. Thank you.